The stagecoach lurched to a sudden stop, throwing Rose forward against the seat in front of her. She had been dozing fitfully, exhausted from 3 days of travel and the constant humiliation of being crammed into a space clearly not designed for someone of her size. At 16 years old and nearly 250 pounds, Rose had learned to make herself as small as possible, a futile effort that never worked, but had become second nature anyway. "End of the line, girl," the driver's voice called from above, rough with contempt. "Get out." Rose peered through the frost-covered window and felt her blood run cold. They were in the middle of a mountain pass, surrounded by towering pines dusted with fresh snow. The late afternoon sun was already slipping behind the peaks, casting long shadows across the landscape. This was nowhere near Silver Creek, the mining town where Rose was supposed to meet her aunt. "I don't understand," Rose said, her voice trembling as she pushed open the coach door and climbed down awkwardly. "The ticket said Silver Creek. We're not there yet." The driver, a wiry man named Barnaby with mean eyes and a perpetual sneer, spat tobacco juice into the snow. "Ticket also said 1 passenger, not 2. You take up the space of 2 people, maybe 3. I ain't hauling you another mile. My horses are already struggling with the extra weight." "But there's nowhere here," Rose protested, looking around desperately at the empty wilderness. "No town, no buildings, nothing. You can't just leave me in the middle of nowhere." "Watch me," Barnaby said, already climbing back to his seat. The other passengers, a middle-aged couple and a traveling salesman, looked away when Rose's pleading eyes found them, unwilling to intervene. They had made their disapproval of her presence clear throughout the journey, whispering about her size, complaining about the cramped space, making cruel jokes they thought she couldn't hear. "Please," Rose begged, tears freezing on her cheeks in the bitter cold. "I'll pay extra. I'll ride outside, anything." "Get your bag and get out of the way," Barnaby interrupted, throwing her worn carpet bag down into the snow. "You got until I count to 3, then I'm driving on, whether you're clear or not." Rose scrambled to grab her bag as Barnaby cracked the whip and the horses lurched forward. She stumbled backward, falling into a snowbank as the stagecoach rumbled past, its wheels kicking up ice and slush that stung her face. Within moments, it had disappeared around a bend, leaving Rose utterly alone in the vast, indifferent wilderness. For several minutes, she simply sat in the snow, too shocked to move. This couldn't be happening. She had used the last of her mother's small inheritance to buy passage to Silver Creek, where her mother's sister had reluctantly agreed to take her in after her mother's death 6 months ago. The aunt had made it clear in her terse letter that Rose would have to earn her keep, that charity had limits. But at least it had been somewhere to go, a destination, a hope of survival. Now she had nothing. No shelter, no food beyond the small lunch her boarding house landlady had packed that morning, and no idea where she was or how far to the nearest settlement. The sun was sinking fast, and with nightfall would come cold that could kill her in hours. Rose forced herself to stand, her legs shaking from cold and fear. She couldn't stay here. Moving was the only option, even if she had no idea which direction to go. The road stretched in both directions, curving around the mountain. One way led back toward the towns they had passed. The other, presumably, led eventually to Silver Creek. But how far? 10 miles? 50? 100? She chose to go forward, following the direction the stagecoach had taken, reasoning that at least she would be heading toward her intended destination. Her thin coat was no match for the mountain cold, and her boots, already worn through at the soles, offered little protection from the snow seeping through with each step. She walked as fast as her exhausted body would allow, trying to generate warmth through movement. After what might have been an hour, or might have been 3, time became meaningless in the twilight blur of cold and fear. Rose realized she had made a terrible mistake. She should have stayed where the coach left her. At least there, someone might have eventually found her on the main road. But in her panic and cold-addled thinking, she had taken what she thought was a shortcut, following a trail that seemed to parallel the road. Now she was deep in the forest, with no idea how to find her way back, and full darkness was falling. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed against a large pine tree, too exhausted to go any further. This was how she would die, she realized with a strange calm. Frozen to death in a mountain forest, alone, her body probably not found until spring. Her aunt would never know what happened to her. Not that the aunt would care much. No one would. Rose had been a burden in life, and in death, she would simply disappear without leaving a mark. She closed her eyes, feeling the cold seeping into her bones, the overwhelming urge to sleep pulling at her consciousness. Just a short rest, she told herself. Then she would get up and keep walking. She knew this was a lie, that sleep in this cold meant death, but she was too tired to fight anymore. Well now, what do we have here? The voice jolted Rose awake, though she didn't remember falling asleep. A man stood a few feet away, so large and imposing that for a moment, Rose thought she was hallucinating. He was tall, well over 6 feet with broad shoulders and a powerfully muscled frame, visible even under his heavy coat. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that caught Rose's attention, gray as winter storm clouds, but warm with concern as they took in her huddled, frozen form. "Please," Rose whispered through numb lips. "Help me." The man moved with surprising speed, dropping to his knees beside her and immediately assessing her condition. "How long have you been out here?" His voice was deep and surprisingly gentle for someone so imposing. "I don't know," Rose admitted. "The stagecoach left me on the pass. I tried to walk, but I got lost." The man's expression darkened with anger, but not at her. "Barnaby," he muttered, seeming to know exactly what had happened. "That bastard's done this before with passengers he doesn't like." He shrugged off his heavy coat and wrapped it around Rose, then scooped her up in his arms as if she weighed nothing. Rose was too cold and exhausted to protest being carried, though part of her brain registered shock that he could lift her so easily. Men usually struggled or refused outright when faced with her weight, but this man simply held her against his broad chest and began walking with sure strides through the darkening forest. "I'm Caleb," he said as he walked. "Caleb Thorne. I live about a mile from here. We'll get you warm and fed, and then we can figure out what comes next. What's your name?" "Rose," she managed through chattering teeth. "Rose Morgan." "Well, Rose Morgan, you picked a hell of a night to go wandering in my woods. Temperature's dropping fast, and we've got a storm coming. But you're safe now. I've got you." Those 3 simple words "I've got you" made Rose start crying, though the tears froze on her cheeks almost immediately. When was the last time anyone had said something like that to her? When had anyone last made her feel safe? Caleb's cabin appeared through the trees like a miracle, solid and welcoming, with smoke rising from its stone chimney. It was larger than Rose expected, built of thick logs chinked against the cold, with a covered porch and shuttered windows glowing with lamplight. Caleb kicked open the door and carried Rose inside, immediately depositing her in a rocking chair near the massive fireplace that dominated one wall. "Don't move," he ordered, already building up the fire to a roaring blaze. "I need to get your wet things off before hypothermia sets in." He disappeared into another room and returned with an armful of blankets and what looked like a nightshirt. "Can you undress yourself, or do you need help?" Rose's face burned despite the cold. "I can manage," she said, though her fingers were so numb she could barely work the buttons on her dress. Caleb nodded and turned his back, giving her privacy while he busied himself at the stove, putting a kettle on to boil. "Tell me when you're decent," he said. "Then I'll make you something hot to drink and get some food in you." With trembling, clumsy fingers, Rose peeled off her wet dress and undergarments, replacing them with the nightshirt Caleb had provided. It was enormous on her, but blessedly warm and dry. She wrapped herself in the blankets and called out softly, "I'm dressed." Caleb turned and assessed her with the same concerned, clinical eye he had used in the forest. "Good. Color's coming back to your cheeks. That's a good sign." He poured hot water over tea leaves in a tin cup and brought it to her. Drink this slowly. Don't gulp it, or you'll make yourself sick." Rose sipped the tea, feeling warmth spreading through her chest and stomach. As sensation returned to her extremities, they began to ache and tingle painfully, but she welcomed even the pain as proof she was alive. She watched Caleb move around the cabin with efficient, practiced movements, adding wood to the fire, preparing food, heating water. He was perhaps 30 years old, she guessed, with the weathered look of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. His muscular frame spoke of hard physical labor, but he moved with surprising grace for someone so large. The cabin itself was surprisingly well appointed for a bachelor's dwelling. Books lined shelves on one wall. The furniture, while simple, was well made and clean. Herbs hung drying from the rafters, and a bearskin rug covered the floor near the fireplace. This was someone's home, not just a rough shelter, a place built with care and attention to comfort. Caleb brought her a bowl of thick stew and a chunk of bread, then settled into a chair across from her with his own meal. "Eat," he said. "Then you can tell me how you ended up alone in my forest." Rose ate ravenously, too hungry to be self-conscious about her appetite. When she finally felt human again, warm and fed and safe, she told him the whole story: her mother's death, the cold letter from her aunt in Silver Creek, the humiliating journey on the stagecoach, and finally, Barnaby's cruel decision to leave her in the wilderness. Caleb's expression grew darker as she spoke, his hands clenching around his cup. "Barnaby's a piece of work," he said when she finished. "He's done this kind of thing before, dumping passengers he deems undesirable in inconvenient places. Usually they make it to a settlement eventually, but in winter, in a storm." He shook his head. "You could have died out there." "I would have," Rose said quietly, "if you hadn't found me." "I almost didn't," Caleb admitted. "I was checking my trap lines, taking a different route than usual because I had a feeling about the weather. Call it fate, call it luck, call it whatever you want. But I'm glad I was there." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sounds the crackling fire, and the wind beginning to howl outside as the promised storm arrived. Finally, Rose asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Why did you help me? Most people don't. They look at me and see—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "They see what?" Caleb prompted gently. "Someone not worth helping," Rose whispered. "Someone disgusting because of her size. Someone who takes up too much space, eats too much, asks for too much just by existing." Caleb set down his cup and leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. "You want to know what I saw when I found you in those woods? I saw someone who had been treated cruelly and was still fighting to survive. Someone who didn't give up, even when she had every reason to." "That's not disgusting, Rose. That's courage." Rose felt tears welling up again. "You're just saying that to be kind." "I'm saying it because it's true," Caleb said firmly. "I don't waste words on pretty lies. Never have, never will. You survived something tonight that would have killed most people. That says something about your strength." Over the following days, as the storm raged outside and made travel impossible, Rose learned more about the man who had saved her life. Caleb had been a soldier in the war, had seen and done things that haunted him still. After it ended, he had come west seeking isolation and peace, building this cabin in the high country where he could live on his own terms. He trapped, hunted, and occasionally worked as a guide for travelers wanting to cross the mountains safely. He was content in his solitude, or so he claimed. But as the days turned into a week, Rose began to see cracks in that contentment. Caleb was lonely, though he would never admit it. He treasured their evening conversations by the fire, when they talked about books or shared stories from their pasts. He taught her practical skills, how to tan leather, how to read animal tracks in the snow, how to make the most of limited supplies during a long winter. And Rose, for her part, found herself contributing in ways that surprised them both. She was an excellent cook, transforming Caleb's simple ingredients into meals that made him groan with pleasure. She organized his chaotic supplies, mended his worn clothes with careful stitches, and brought a warmth to the cabin that had nothing to do with the fire. She made the space feel like a home rather than just a shelter, and Caleb responded to that transformation like a plant turning towards sunlight. One evening, about 2 weeks after Rose's arrival, Caleb spoke the words that would change both their lives. They were sitting by the fire as usual, Rose mending one of his shirts, while Caleb carved a piece of wood into what looked like it might become a spoon. He set down his knife and looked at her with an expression Rose couldn't quite read. "Rose," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something. When the weather breaks and the pass clears, I'll take you to Silver Creek if that's still what you want. I'll make sure you get to your aunt safely, and I'll have words with Barnaby about what he did, but—" He paused, seeming to gather courage. "But I'm hoping you might consider staying here instead." Rose's hand stilled on the shirt. "Staying? What do you mean?" "I mean staying with me, as my wife, if you'll have me." Caleb spoke in a rush now, as if he had to get the words out before he lost his nerve. "I know it's sudden, and I know we've only known each other a short time. But Rose, you've brought life back to this cabin, back to me. I've been alone up here for 8 years, and I thought I preferred it that way. Then you stumbled into my forest, and I realized what I've been missing. You fit here. You fit with me. And He took a deep breath. "I've waited my whole life for you, Rose Morgan. I just didn't know it until you showed up half frozen in the snow." Rose stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "But I mean, you could have anyone. Someone beautiful, someone—" "You are beautiful," Caleb interrupted fiercely. "And even if you weren't by conventional standards, it wouldn't matter. Beauty fades, Rose. Bodies change. What matters is what's inside your kindness, your strength, your resilience, your ability to make a place feel like home. Those are the things I value, and those are the things you have in abundance." He moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her work-roughened hands in his much larger ones. "I'm not a rich man. I can't offer you luxury or society or easy living. What I can offer is a home where you'll be valued, respected, and loved exactly as you are, where you'll never have to make yourself small or apologize for existing, where you can be yourself without fear of judgment or cruelty. That's what I'm offering, Rose. A partnership, a life, a future." Tears streamed down Rose's face as she looked at this unexpected, impossible man kneeling before her. "I thought I was going to die in those woods," she whispered. "I thought my life was over. Instead, I found you. Found this." She gestured at the cabin, the warmth, the safety, the feeling of belonging she had never experienced before. "Yes, Caleb. Yes, I'll marry you. I'll stay. I'll build this life with you." The smile that crossed Caleb's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, brilliant, warm, transformative. He pulled Rose to her feet and into his arms, holding her with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "I promise you won't regret this," he murmured into her hair. "I'll spend every day making sure you know how precious you are." They married a week later, when the weather broke enough for Caleb to ride down to the nearest settlement and fetch the circuit preacher. The ceremony was simple, performed in the cabin with only the preacher as witness, but Rose had never felt anything more sacred. When Caleb slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, one he had traded furs for during his trip, and spoke his vows with fierce sincerity, Rose felt something inside her heel that she hadn't even known was broken. Their wedding night was tender and awkward and beautiful. Two people learning each other's bodies and hearts simultaneously. Caleb was patient with Rose's inexperience and insecurity, showing her with touch and whispered words that he found her desirable exactly as she was. And Rose, in turn, brought a sweetness and passion to their lovemaking that left Caleb trembling with wonder at his unexpected good fortune. But their peace was short-lived. With spring came trouble in the form of Barnaby and a group of men from the settlements below. Word had spread about the fat girl Barnaby had left in the mountains, and when she had failed to turn up dead, or in Silver Creek, people began asking questions. Barnaby, trying to protect his business and reputation, had concocted a story about Rose being kidnapped by a mountain man rumored to have hidden gold. The confrontation happened on a warm April morning as Rose was tending the small garden she had started near the cabin. She heard horses approaching and looked up to see a dozen mounted men, led by Barnaby and a man wearing a sheriff's star. Her heart sank. Caleb emerged from the cabin at the sound of voices, his rifle held casually but ready. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he called out. His voice calm but his eyes hard. The sheriff, a weathered man named Wyatt with shrewd eyes, spoke first. "We're looking for a girl named Rose Morgan. This man," he gestured at Barnaby, "claims you kidnapped her from the Stagecoach Road and are holding her against her will." "That's a damned lie," Caleb said flatly. "Barnaby here abandoned Rose in a snowstorm to freeze to death. I found her, brought her to safety, and she chose to stay. She's my wife now." "Wife?" Barnaby sneered. "More like he's keeping her prisoner, probably for ransom. Everyone knows Caleb Thorne's got gold hidden up here somewhere. He needs the girl to work his land, do his cooking." "I chose to stay," Rose said loudly, stepping forward despite Caleb's warning look. "Nobody kidnapped me. Nobody's holding me prisoner. Barnaby left me in the mountains to die because he didn't want to haul my weight. Caleb saved my life, treated me with more kindness and respect than anyone ever has. And yes, I married him. By choice. My choice." Sheriff Wyatt studied her carefully. "You're saying you're here willingly? That you want to be here?" "I'm saying this is my home," Rose said firmly. "Caleb is my husband. And if Barnaby and his lies have brought you all the way up here on some wild goose chase about gold that doesn't exist, then I'm sorry for wasting your time. But I'm not going anywhere." Several of the men behind the sheriff shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing the truth when they heard it. But Barnaby wasn't finished. "She's lying. He's got her under some kind of spell. Or she's too scared to tell the truth. We need to search the property, find the gold." "There is no gold," Caleb said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "And you're not searching my property. You've got no warrant, no evidence. Nothing but the lies of a man trying to cover up the fact that he left a 16-year-old girl to freeze to death. Now I suggest you get off my land before I start shooting." Barnaby made the mistake of reaching for his own gun. Caleb's rifle came up in a blur of motion, firing a shot that kicked up snow right between Barnaby's horse's hooves. The animal reared, nearly throwing its rider, while the other horses danced nervously. Several of the hired men reached for their weapons, but Sheriff Wyatt held up a hand. "Hold your fire," he barked. Then to Caleb, "That was a warning shot, I take it?" "It was," Caleb confirmed, already reloading. "The next one won't be. I'm a patient man, Sheriff, but I won't have my wife insulted or my home threatened. Rose has told you the truth. You can either accept that and leave, or we can have a problem that ends badly for everyone." The sheriff studied Caleb's face, then looked at Rose, who had moved to stand beside her husband, her hand finding his free one. Whatever he saw in their clasped hands and united stance seemed to satisfy him. "Mr. Barnaby," he said slowly, "I think we've heard enough. The lady has made her position clear. She's married, she's here by choice, and unless you've got actual evidence of wrongdoing, which you don't, I'm calling this matter closed." "But the gold," Barnaby sputtered. "There is no gold," the sheriff interrupted sharply. "You brought me up here chasing rumors and trying to cover your own backside for abandoning a paying passenger. That's the real crime here, Barnaby. And if excuse me, Mrs. Thorne wanted to press charges, you'd be the one in trouble." Barnaby's face turned purple with rage, but even he recognized he had lost this battle. With a final venomous look at Rose and Caleb, he wheeled his horse around and galloped down the mountain trail. The hired men followed more slowly, some tipping their hats respectfully to Rose as they passed. Sheriff Wyatt lingered a moment longer. "Mrs. Thorne," he said formally, "if you ever need help or want to leave, you just get word to my office. but it seems to me you've found yourself a good situation here. Take care of yourself." "I will," Rose promised. "Thank you, Sheriff, for listening." Oui. After the sheriff and his men disappeared down the trail, Rose and Caleb stood together on their land, hands still clasped, watching the sun climb higher over the mountains. The valley spread before them, green and alive with spring, full of promise. "That was close," Rose said softly. "Too close," Caleb agreed. "But you were magnificent. The way you stood up to them, declared your choice, I've never been more proud of anyone." Rose turned to look at her husband, this unexpected gift that had come from her darkest moment. "I meant what I said. This is my home. You're my family. I choose this life, Caleb. I choose you. Every day, I choose you." Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were precious and irreplaceable. "I've waited my whole life for you," he repeated, the words he had spoken weeks ago taking on even deeper meaning now. "And I'll spend the rest of my life being worthy of you." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, their cabin solid and welcoming behind them, the wilderness vast and beautiful around them. Rose thought about the terrified girl who had been abandoned in the snow, certain she was going to die alone and unmourned. That girl could never have imagined this a home, a husband, a life where she was valued and loved exactly as she was. But that girl had fought to survive, had kept moving even when everything seemed hopeless, had been brave enough to accept unexpected kindness when it was offered. And in doing so, she had found not just survival, but something far more precious, a place to belong, a person to love, and the unshakable knowledge that she had always been worth saving. As they finally turned and walked back to their cabin together, Rose sent a silent thank you to whatever fate or fortune had led her to Caleb's forest that frozen night. She had been abandoned by cruelty but found by love. She had been left to die, but had instead learned to truly live. And in Caleb's arms, in their mountain home, surrounded by wild beauty and hard-won peace, Rose Morgan Thorne had finally completely come home.